Omega found a baby crying in snow. The Alpha King's mark appeared when fate took hold. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Elena Brooks had learned to walk quietly through the edges of the world, where expectations were low and footsteps were rarely noticed. And that night the cold pressed in like a living thing as she moved along the tree line beyond the pack's lights. Her boots sinking into fresh snow that reached nearly 6 inches deep, the air sharp enough to sting her lungs with every breath. She was an Omega, the kind people overlooked when work was handed out and remembered only when something needed to be done, far from warmth and company. And she told herself she didn't mind. That solitude was easier than hoping for kindness that never came. The sky was a pale wash of gray, the moon hidden behind slow-moving clouds, and the forest carried a hush that felt heavier than silence, as if it were listening. Elena adjusted the thin scarf at her neck and kept walking, counting steps the way she always did when the cold tried to steal feeling from her fingers. 1, 2, 3, steady and careful, until a sound cut through the stillness. It was faint at first, a wavering cry that didn't belong to the wind or the branches, and she stopped, heart lifting and tightening all at once, turning toward the sound with a disbelief that made her pulse quicken. She followed it past a fallen log and into a shallow clearing where the snow lay untouched, and there, nestled against the drift as if the world had forgotten him, was a baby wrapped in a worn blanket, cheeks flushed from the cold, tiny hands trembling as the cry rose again, thin and fragile. Elena didn't think, didn't weigh rules or consequences. She dropped to her knees, the snow soaking through her jeans as she gathered the child close, cradling him against her chest, whispering soft words she barely realized she knew, promising warmth and safety with a voice that shook but didn't break. The baby quieted a little, his breathing uneven, and Elena pulled her coat tighter around them both, turning her body to block the wind, feeling the ache spread through her shoulders as minutes passed and the cold crept deeper. She checked his face again, brushed a thumb along his tiny brow, and felt something stir inside her, a warmth that wasn't from movement or breath, a gentle pressure beneath her skin that glowed like an ember. As she held him, the warmth grew, steady and calm, and she gasped softly when a faint symbol shimmered along her wrist, delicate and unmistakable, a mark she had only ever heard whispered about, the Alpha King's mark, appearing as if it had always been waiting for this exact moment. Elena stared, stunned and confused, the baby resting quietly against her heart, while somewhere beyond the trees a presence paused, unseen, watching the snow-lit clearing with eyes that recognized destiny the instant it took hold. The warmth did not fade when Elena shifted her grip, and that was what frightened her most, because nothing like this had ever happened before, not to an Omega like her, not in a world that taught her to expect cold answers and smaller hopes. The baby stirred against her chest, a soft sound escaping his lips as if he sensed the change, and Elena pressed her cheek lightly to his hat, breathing him in, memorizing the steady rhythm of his tiny breaths so she would not panic. Snow continued to fall, quiet and patient, but the forest no longer felt empty, and she became aware of the strange stillness surrounding the clearing, the way the wind seemed to pause as if waiting. Her wrist tingled where the mark rested, warm beneath her skin, not painful, not sharp, just present, like a promise she did not understand, and she pulled her sleeve down instinctively even though there was no one to see it. She told herself it had to be exhaustion, the cold playing tricks on her, but deep inside she knew that excuses did not explain the calm settling into her bones. She rose carefully, keeping the baby secure, her knees stiff as she stood, and took a few slow steps toward the path that would lead back to shelter, measuring each movement so she would not slip. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest, heavier than fear, because she could not imagine leaving him here, and she could not imagine what would happen when others saw her carrying a child that was not hers. As she walked, the warmth seemed to guide her, nudging her instincts toward the safest route, and she followed without question, trusting something older than reason. Somewhere beyond the trees, unseen eyes tracked her progress, not with threat or judgment, but with an intensity that made the night itself feel alert. And Alpha King Rowan Blackwood slowed his steps, his breath fogging the air as he watched the Omega move through the snow with a steadiness that should not have been possible. He had felt the mark ignite the moment it appeared, a deep pulse settling into his chest, unmistakable and rare, and he knew the bond had awakened not through command or ceremony, but through choice, through compassion freely given. He did not step forward, did not break the fragile balance of the moment, because fate had already spoken and he would not rush what it had carefully set in motion. Elena reached the edge of the clearing where the trees thickened, and she paused to adjust the baby again, brushing snow from his blanket and murmuring soothing words, her voice low and gentle, the way she had always spoken to frightened animals and lonely nights. The mark pulsed once, soft as a heartbeat, and she closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself in the sound of his breathing and the solid feel of his weight in her arms. She did not know that the child carried a legacy far greater than she could imagine, only that he needed warmth and safety, and that she could give him both. By the time the first lights of the pack came into view through the branches, Elena had already made her choice, even if she could not yet name it, and behind her, in the hush of falling snow, the Alpha King turned back into the forest, certain now that the path ahead had changed forever. Elena did not go to the main hall where voices gathered and questions waited. Instead, she slipped into the small warming room near the storage sheds, a place meant for tools and winter coats, because instinct told her quiet mattered more than explanations tonight. She laid the baby down on a folded blanket near the low iron stove and fed the fire with a careful hand, counting the seconds until warmth returned to his fingers, watching color slowly bloom back into his cheeks. Relief loosened something in her chest. She had been holding tight since the clearing, and she brushed a curl from his forehead, smiling despite herself when his eyes fluttered open and fixed on her face, as if he knew her already. The mark beneath her sleeve stirred again, a gentle reminder she could not ignore, and she pressed her palm to it, breathing through the strange certainty that came with it, the feeling of being seen even while alone. Outside, snow whispered against the walls, and footsteps passed without stopping, the pack unaware of how the night had shifted. Elena hummed softly, a tune her mother used to hum when storms rattled the windows, and the baby relaxed, his breathing evening out until he drifted into sleep, small and trusting. She sat back on her heels and let herself think, just for a moment, about what came next, about the questions she would face and the rules she might be breaking simply by caring, and the thought did not frighten her the way it once would have. Somewhere beyond the buildings, Alpha King Rowan Blackwood stood at the edge of the grounds, the bond steady and unmistakable, guiding him closer without urgency, because this was not a hunt or a command, it was a vigil. He felt the child's presence like a quiet beacon, familiar and precious, and felt Elena's resolve layered over it, strong in a way that surprised even him. He ordered no alarms, summoned no guards, choosing instead to trust the path unfolding, because true power did not need to announce itself. When Elena finally stood and wrapped the baby more securely, she heard a knock, gentle and unassuming, and her heart jumped before settling again, the mark warming as if in reassurance. She opened the door to find a man waiting, tall and calm, his coat dusted with snow, his expression composed but attentive, eyes the color of winter sky meeting hers without pressure. He did not introduce himself, did not step forward, only spoke with a voice that carried respect. He said the child was safe now and thanked her for bringing him in from the cold, and the words felt heavier than titles ever could. Elena nodded, aware of the quiet strength in him, aware that her life had brushed against something vast and ancient, and yet she did not feel small. She answered simply that anyone would have done the same, though they both knew it was not true, and he smiled, just enough to acknowledge the choice she had made. As the fire crackled behind her and the baby slept between them, the night settled into a new shape, one where kindness had already rewritten the rules, and fate, once awakened, did not intend to be denied. Elena stepped aside to let the man enter, though some instinct told her he did not need permission, and yet he waited until she nodded before crossing the threshold, his presence filling the small room without crowding it. He glanced once at the sleeping baby, his gaze softening in a way that surprised her, then returned his attention to her face, as if she were the one who needed reassurance most. He asked how long the child had been exposed to the cold, his tone measured, and Elena answered honestly, describing the clearing, the snow, the sound that had drawn her there, leaving out only the mark that still warmed her wrist. As she spoke, she realized her hands were steady, her voice clear, and that steadiness felt like a gift she had earned. The man listened without interruption, nodding once, as if every word confirmed something he already knew, and he told her the baby would recover fully now, that warmth and rest were all he needed. Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding, and the relief that followed was almost dizzying. He introduced himself simply as Rowan, no title, no explanation, and though the name resonated in her chest, she accepted it without question, because this night had already taught her that some truths arrived gently. Rowan asked if she would stay with the child until morning, and she answered yes without hesitation, because leaving had never been an option. He acknowledged her answer with a quiet look of respect, one that carried weight without demand, and for the first time in her life, Elena felt like her choice mattered. Outside, the snow eased, the storm settling into a calm that felt deliberate, and within the room, the fire burned steady, casting warm light across shelves and stone. Rowan moved to the doorway and paused, glancing back as if committing the scene to memory, then told her someone would bring fresh blankets and food, and that she would not be disturbed. When he left, the space did not feel emptier, only settled, as though something unseen had taken its proper place. Elena returned to the baby, adjusting the blanket and sitting close, letting the quiet wrap around her, her thoughts slower now, clearer. The mark pulsed again, not demanding attention, simply present, and she finally allowed herself to look at it, tracing the faint lines with her thumb, feeling neither fear nor confusion, only a sense of alignment she had never known. She did not understand what the mark meant, only that it had appeared when she chose compassion without reward, and that knowledge steadied her more than answers ever could. Hours passed gently, measured by the rise and fall of the baby's chest and the soft sounds of the night beyond the walls. When dawn hinted at the edges of the windows, Elena felt tired but whole, anchored by a purpose that had quietly claimed her. Somewhere beyond the buildings, Rowan watched the light change, aware of the bond settling into permanence, aware that the Omega who had knelt in the snow had altered the course of more than one life. He did not smile, not yet, but he acknowledged the truth with calm certainty, knowing that fate did not rush, and that the strongest beginnings often unfolded in silence. Morning arrived quietly, a pale ribbon of light slipping through the high window as Elena stirred from a shallow rest, her back against the wall, and the baby still warm and sleeping beside her. The night had changed something fundamental, not in the world outside, but in the way she occupied it, and she felt it in the calm of her breathing and the steadiness of her thoughts. When she rose, careful not to wake him, she noticed fresh blankets folded neatly near the door and a small tray with bread and steaming tea, proof that promises made in low voices had been kept. She ate slowly, listening to the soft sounds of the grounds coming alive, footsteps measured, doors opening, the rhythm of a place that functioned with quiet purpose. The baby woke soon after, blinking up at her with surprising focus, and she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, lifting him gently and speaking to him as if they had always belonged in the same morning. The mark rested against her skin like a steady pulse, neither fading nor demanding attention, simply present, and she accepted it as she accepted the warmth of the room and the small weight in her arms. A knock came again, respectful and unhurried, and this time when Rowan entered, he did not stand apart. He moved closer, checking the child with practiced ease, satisfaction evident in the way his shoulders eased. He thanked her again, not as an obligation, but as recognition, and asked if she would walk with him once the baby was settled, because there were things she deserved to hear in daylight. Elena hesitated only long enough to ensure the child was comfortable, then agreed, because something in his tone suggested truth rather than command. They stepped outside together, the cold gentler now, the snow reflecting the morning sky, and Elena noticed how people paused without staring, how space opened naturally around Rowan without fear, only respect. As they walked, he spoke of responsibility and care, of how leadership was measured not by how loudly it was declared, but by what it protected when no one was watching, and Elena listened, understanding more than she expected. He told her the child was named Noah, that he was cherished, and that his safety had been entrusted to fate in a moment of danger, a moment she had answered without knowing the cost or reward. Elena did not ask how Rowan knew these things, only nodded, because explanations could wait when understanding already lived in her chest. When they stopped near the edge of the grounds, Rowan finally acknowledged the mark, not by naming it aloud, but by meeting her eyes and asking how she felt, as if her experience mattered more than tradition. She answered honestly that she felt calm, grounded, and strangely certain, and the relief that crossed his face told her she had said the right thing. He did not claim her, did not make declarations. He simply said that choices born of kindness had a way of reshaping the future, and that he would honor hers as carefully as she had honored a life in the snow. As they turned back, Elena realized the whispers she had feared did not follow her, only a quiet shift in how she was seen, not as an omega sent to the edges, but as someone whose presence mattered. And somewhere between the crunch of snow beneath her boots and the steady warmth of the mark against her wrist, Elena understood that this was only the beginning, not of a story told loudly, but of one built patiently, choice by choice, in the open light of day. The days that followed settled into a quiet pattern that felt both unfamiliar and right, and Elena found herself moving through the grounds with a new awareness, not of attention drawn to her, but of space gently offered. She spent her mornings with Noah, learning the small language of his needs, the way his hands curled when he slept and the sound he made when he was content, and she spoke to him as if her voice could anchor him to the world. The mark remained, warm and constant, never intruding, only present, and she noticed how it responded not to proximity or rank, but to intention, steadying when she felt uncertain, calming when doubt tried to rise. Rowan checked in without ceremony, sometimes only with a nod or a brief question, trusting her rhythm rather than imposing his own, and that trust reshaped something deep inside her. Word spread slowly, not through proclamations, but through observation, and people began to greet her with quiet respect, not because they understood what had happened, but because they recognized sincerity when they saw it. One afternoon, as the snow thinned and the paths grew clearer, Rowan invited Elena to walk beyond the inner grounds, toward the old lookout where the forest opened wide, a place few visited without reason. He spoke then of balance, of how the pack had endured because it learned when to lead and when to listen, and Elena realized he was not teaching her, but sharing, offering perspective rather than instruction. She admitted that she still felt like an outsider, uncertain of her place, and Rowan answered that belonging was not granted by others, but built through choices repeated over time. As they stood overlooking the trees, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine, Elena felt the truth of it settle in her chest, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. That evening, when a small gathering formed near the fire pits, Elena hesitated at the edge, instinct urging retreat, but Noah stirred in her arms, and the mark warmed, and she stepped forward instead. Conversation paused only briefly, then resumed, space making room for her naturally, and she realized no one needed convincing when actions had already spoken. Rowan joined them later, his presence steady, and for the first time, Elena felt not singled out, but included, part of a whole rather than an exception. As the fire crackled and the sky darkened, Rowan spoke to the group about care and vigilance, about watching the quiet places as closely as the loud ones, and his gaze met Elena's not as a claim, but as acknowledgement. She understood then that the bond between them was not a chain or a crown, but a shared direction, aligned by values rather than titles. When the gathering dispersed and Elena returned Noah to his resting place, she lingered, watching his chest rise and fall, feeling gratitude rather than fear for what lay ahead. Outside, Rowan paused beneath the stars, aware of the path unfolding with deliberate grace, aware that strength had revealed itself not through force, but through gentleness chosen again and again. And as night settled over the grounds, Elena rested with a sense of quiet certainty, knowing that whatever came next would be met not as an omega pushed to the margins, but as someone whose choices had already begun to shape the future. Change arrived without announcement, woven into small moments that asked Elena to decide who she would be when attention turned her way, and she learned quickly that quiet choices carried the most weight. Requests began to come, careful at first, then more certain, questions about Noah's comfort, about warmth and routine, about what she noticed that others overlooked, and she answered with patience rather than pride, knowing trust grew best when tended gently. The Mark responded not to praise but to purpose, steadying her when expectations pressed close, reminding her that alignment mattered more than approval. Rowan observed without intervening, allowing space for growth, and when he spoke to her, it was to listen as much as to share, acknowledging that insight often came from the margins. One afternoon, clouds gathered low and gray, and a hush settled over the grounds, the kind that preceded decisions. And Elena felt it before anyone else did, a subtle tightening in the air that made her pause. She followed that feeling to the outer path where supplies were checked and plans reviewed, and she offered a simple suggestion about timing and shelter that shifted the flow of the day, preventing strain before it began. The response was immediate and calm, adjustments made without debate, and Elena realized leadership did not always wear a crown. Sometimes it wore attention. Later, Rowan joined her near the old stones, acknowledging the moment with a nod, and said that foresight was a form of care, one that protected without spectacle. She admitted she still doubted herself at times, still expected to be told she had overstepped, and he answered that confidence grew from repetition, from seeing the good your choices did and choosing them again anyway. As dusk approached, a small council formed by the fire, voices measured, faces thoughtful, and Elena was invited to sit, not at the center, but not at the edge either, a place that felt exactly right. She spoke only when she had something to add, and when she did, the room listened, not because of the Mark or Rowan's presence, but because her words carried care. Noah slept nearby, content and safe, and Elena felt a quiet gratitude that steadied her hands. When the meeting ended, Rowan walked with her beneath a sky clearing to reveal stars, and he asked not about plans or bonds, but about how she was holding the weight of change. She answered honestly that it was heavy and hopeful, and that she was learning how to stand without bracing for dismissal. He shared then that strength earned through gentleness lasted longer than strength taken by force, and that the pack would be shaped by which it chose to honor. The night deepened, and Elena returned to rest with a sense of earned belonging, not claimed, not granted, but built through presence and care. From a distance, Rowan watched the ground settle, aware that the future was aligning around values rather than fear, and that the Omega who had knelt in the snow had become a steady axis, quietly transforming the space around her by choosing to remain open when closing would have been easier. And as sleep found her, Elena felt the Mark warm in affirmation, not of destiny imposed, but of a path chosen and walked with intention. The truth did not arrive as a proclamation but as an invitation, and Elena sensed it before Rowan spoke, in the way the day seemed to hold its breath as they walked toward the quieter wing where records were kept and memories were honored. He did not rush, matching her pace, allowing the space between words to matter, and when he finally began, his voice carried care rather than gravity. He told her that Noah was more than a child who needed warmth, that he carried a lineage entrusted to protection rather than display, and that in a moment of risk, the world had placed him where compassion would answer first. Elena listened without interruption, her hands steady as she held Noah close, absorbing the meaning without letting it eclipse the simple truth that he was safe and loved. Rowan explained that trust had guided the choice to wait, to allow the bond to settle naturally, because outcomes born of patience endured, and Elena felt gratitude rather than surprise, recognizing the respect and restraint. She asked what this meant for the days ahead, not for herself, but for the child, and Rowan answered plainly that it meant care would be shared, not extracted, and that her role would be honored without confinement. Relief softened her shoulders, and the Mark warmed in quiet agreement, as if affirming that alignment was not a burden. As they stepped back into the light, Elena noticed how the grounds responded, not with spectacle, but with ease, routines flowing, people greeting her without hesitation, the ordinary becoming welcoming. Later, when a small assembly gathered to mark the changing season, Rowan addressed them with measured words about vigilance and kindness, about how strength revealed itself through protection chosen freely, and Elena stood among them not as a symbol, but as herself. He did not name the bond, did not elevate it above the values it reflected, and the pack responded with calm acceptance, understanding without being told. Afterward, a woman offered Elena a warm wrap for Noah. Another asked if she needed rest, gestures simple and sincere, and Elena felt the last edges of doubt loosen. That evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Rowan joined her near the overlook, and for the first time, he spoke of the future without framing it as destiny, describing instead a path shaped by listening, by shared responsibility, by choosing care again and again. Elena answered that she would walk that path so long as it remained rooted in compassion, and he met her words with a nod that carried promise without pressure. When night settled and stars emerged, Elena returned Noah to his cradle, lingering as she always did, tracing the outline of his small hand and breathing in the calm of the room. The mark rested warm and steady, no longer mysterious, simply present, a quiet testament to a choice made in the snow and honored in daylight. Outside, Rowan watched the lights dim, aware that revelation did not require ceremony to be true, and that the most enduring bonds were those recognized by how they changed the way people treated one another. As sleep found Elena, she held a certainty that did not depend on titles or declarations, knowing that what had been entrusted to her had already reshaped the future, not through force or fear, but through the courage to remain kind when it mattered most. The season turned without ceremony, and Elena felt the change in the way light lingered longer across the paths, and the snow softened into quiet patches of earth, revealing what had always been there beneath. She moved through the days with an ease she had never known, not because challenges vanished, but because she met them with steadiness rather than fear. Noah grew stronger, his laughter a bright sound that traveled easily, and Elena learned the joy of ordinary care, the rhythm of feeding and rest, the way presence could be both grounding and freeing. The mark remained warm and constant, no longer a question but a companion, reflecting a bond built on shared values rather than spectacle. Rowan continued to lead with intention, and when he stood beside Elena, it was not to elevate her above others, but to affirm a direction they walked together, one that honored listening as much as resolve. A gathering was called as the first green pushed through the thaw, not to announce power, but to acknowledge gratitude, and Elena stood among the people she had once avoided, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze open. Rowan spoke of vigilance and care, of how a community thrived when it protected the quiet places as fiercely as the visible ones, and when his words ended, he invited Elena forward, not to be praised, but to be recognized for choices that had already shaped them all. She spoke simply, thanking those who had offered help and space, reminding them that strength revealed itself in kindness chosen without reward, and the response was calm and genuine, acceptance settling like sunlight rather than thunder. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Rowan met her by the old stones, the wind gentle, the horizon clear, and he asked if she felt ready for what came next, not as a demand, but as a question rooted in respect. Elena answered that readiness was not certainty, but willingness, and that she was willing to keep choosing care, even when it required patience. He nodded, and in that quiet exchange, a promise took shape, not bound by ceremony, but by continued alignment. As dusk deepened, Elena returned Noah to rest, her hand resting over the mark as she breathed in the peace of the room, understanding that destiny had not been imposed upon her. It had answered her when she chose compassion in the cold. Outside, Rowan watched the lights dim and the stars emerge, aware that leadership had been strengthened by humility and that the future was steadier for it. When Elena finally rested, sleep came easily, carrying with it a certainty that did not need words, knowing that what began as a cry in the snow had grown into a bond defined by gentleness and trust. And as the night settled, the grounds held a quiet truth, that true strength was gentle, that love redeemed without spectacle, and that a world reshaped by care would continue to choose it, one deliberate step at a time.